Welcome back to another episode of Keoni Chats, but in HD vision, as I decided to upgrade the camera for those of you that are watching from home or on the go through a YouTube app. I wanted to make sure that the lines were a little clearer, a little sharper, so that way you can actually see me or see whoever my guests are instead of that blob you've been seeing in previous episodes or just that blurry, hazy thing in front of you. But I have a great episode for you today. My guest is a longtime supporter of the program. His name is Adam Becenti, and I've only known him as the passionate paddle sport athlete, from Dragon Boats and Outrigger. But I never really knew him as the director of the Office of Tribal Affairs for the state of Oregon. We have those text conversations saying, hey, let's go grab some lunch, grab some dinner, or let's grab some drinks. And he was always, very short about his answers when I asked him how's work going, and he never really got in depth. And it was interesting because I'm like that at times, but I'm learning not to be because I want to share with people. And not saying that he's doesn't want to share, but also I'll leave it at that because he does talk about this in the interview, and I don't want to spoil it for you guys. I want to make sure that I give you nuggets. That way you stick around and don't just dip out in the middle of the episode. But I wanted to talk to him actually about his beginnings as a paddle sport athlete. It's just because he is, from New Mexico, and then he spent some time in Colorado, spent some time in Michigan, and then he went to Oregon, and I want to see how he got there. But it seemed more important to talk about this society and what's going on right now with the Black Lives Matter movement across the world, and he had some great insights. He has been at the protests, not every night, but every so often. So it was good to get his perspective about it, and I have a lot of thoughts, a little bit of anxieties when it came to the big crowds in the protests. So it was good to hear his thoughts about it, and I got him to open up, and I knew there was more I could get him to open up on, but as a guy that I've only known for a couple of years, that's the most I've heard about his thoughts. I've heard about how he's feeling, and that was profound. That was great. So before we dive into that chat, I just wanted to remind those fans of the DC universe that I do have a blog series that's reviewing all of the animated movies, I should say, on my website. So that's keoniconlu.com, KEONICONLU.com. Hit the menu button, go to blogs, hit the DC picture, and that should take you to my breakdown of those certain years. So I believe I just finished 2014, and even with 5 years left until I'm caught up, I still have a long road. That studio has been pumping out movies like crazy the last 5 years, and having a continuity line, it's fantastic. It's a great long goal that I love working on. So if you check it out, even if I'm wrong, even if you don't like my review, or if you like my review, or if I'm missing a movie, let me know. Let's connect. Let's talk. Let's chat. So yeah, without prolonging this longer, I hope that whether you are listening to this interview with Adam through Spotify or iTunes, or if you're watching it in HD vision on YouTube, I hope you enjoy my chat with Adam Becenti. All right, Adam Becenti, longtime supporter of the program and just supporter of a friendship overall. How are we doing today?
Doing great. How you doing?
It's been a really nice week on my end of Portland. I'm sure your end as well. So got some color. Got to be outside a little bit. Died a little bit on a run, but it's cardio. It's all fun and games.
Definitely.
So I wanted to start the conversation off. I knew you were attending the Black Lives Matter protest in downtown on Friday. and I usually record on Sundays, so a couple days later. How was that for you? And what was the most impactful thing you heard or saw while you're in that movement?
Yeah, before I do get started, I would love to introduce myself. As a tribal person, an indigenous person, I think it's always good that we introduce ourselves in our traditional language. And so I just want to start there, and I can then jump to your question. But yeah, Adam Becenti in a shit and a Jinin Schlitz and a head Tabaha Dashache, Toruchi Dashanella. And what I just said was just basically introducing myself in my and Dene Bazad, which is the Navajo language, So gave my name, Adam Becenti, and then my clans, and the clan, of course, within my mother's clan, which we first introduce and identify ourselves as Black Streak Wood Clan, and so I definitely wanted to make sure I do that as a person. I think I was always taught that as a young man, and as a Navajo person, Dene person. It's good to introduce yourself, especially as we're meeting other people that are tribal or other Dene people. So I just wanted to start there. So thanks, I appreciate that moment there.
Yeah, of course.
Well, I to answer your question, the Black Lives Matter movement, the everything that's been happening has been incredible. Right now, I think what everyone is experiencing is a revolution. I know that word sometimes gets thrown around quite a bit, but judging from the things that have happened and that are happening, not only in this state of Oregon, but across the nation and across the world, I think there certainly is a revolution that's happening. And for me to be able to contribute in any way that I can, I just feel, privileged and feel that it's also an obligation, and I do with the work that I do and everything that I engage with, I feel like it all comes back to caring for others, right? And to really look beyond myself and be unselfish. And how can I contribute? And so lately, within Portland, I've been going out to the Black Lives Matter protests and the marches and the demonstrations, and really just taking it all in and just trying to support, whether it be physically, whether it be connecting others to each other. But everything has just been incredible so far. And, obviously this is not just a moment, but really a movement that has, taken this city by storm and everywhere else as well. And certainly being embraced. Of course, there is obviously conflict as well. And with, people who might not quite understand yet about the purposes of what we're trying to do. And but overall the experience has been incredible, and I'm glad to support. And I've continued to support. I feel like when I was growing up, I always understood myself, as a Native person, and as I set off to college, that sort of thing. You start to really see and experience things that test you, that really test who you are. For example, experiencing racism or discrimination. And so, learning all of that type of, learning through those experiences has really just made me more confident and made me, stand up, right? Because I feel like one of the things that when it comes to this question, when it comes to engaging with this movement, Black Lives Matter, I always think to myself about the quote: if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And so I think that's really been fueling me lately, and really keeping me going, which I'm just excited things are happening. Honestly, don't know what's going to happen, right? No one does, but I feel like things are moving in the right direction.
Yeah, it's Portland's starting to hit the mainstream media outlets, not for the greatest reasons. With was it interim Secretary of State I can't remember his first name. His last name is Wolf. He's in town, and then everything else going on with the like unmarked van abductions. I mean, that's Portland. I would like to see Portland in the news for good reasons, like oh, the city of roses, and it's doing this to help with the movement. Not for these reasons. it's it's like it's. And then I asked a few people, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Portland's. I think they heard that Portland's getting treated as like a guinea pig type of city with trying some new ways to help control the protests going on." But I'm just like, it's not the reason. These are not reasons I want to see my city on the news. It's but from everything I've seen, it's going on for what 50 plus consecutive nights. It's how do you um when you see the night coverage of the protests and you see that there's police and all these other things, not just in Portland, just going on around the country, you see some violence that kind of spew out from the Black Lives Matter movement. How do you kind of weigh those risks and with the need to stand for something? Because it's going to happen, but just that unpredictability. How do you weigh those out?
Sure. I think it's going to be different for everyone, and obviously, I'm speaking for myself in regards to how I support. And as I have grown into an older adult, I certainly weigh those risks a lot more, right? And really think things through, and just follow my gut often at times. What folks may not understand and may not see within the media or how things are being portrayed is that there are so many marches and protests happening across the city and across the state, and it's not all about going to the Justice Center and getting tear gas, that sort of thing. It's not just that. I think what is happening, there are so many other demonstrations and folks gathering and collecting together and really sharing love, right? Sharing compassion for one another, educating one another. Of course, with all of our black relatives, expressing their frustration, right? Their pain. And I was actually out last night on the waterfront, and then there was a memorial for a young woman, black girl, really young, and just it was a different type of feeling and a different really just an honoring of her life. And so it wasn't what people think, in terms of like coming together, and but it was more of geared towards just prayer, really sharing space with each other, kind of a solidarity moment. And so it was great to be able to hear just some of the stories and be able to honor someone like that. There's also been marches where you have a line of speakers. I know I've been involved in and out with, or at least supporting the folks at Road City Justice, who were putting a lot of events together, which they've taken a step back a bit. But just for an example, they were putting together evening, speakers. They had basically like a well thought out sort of program each night that had different speakers. And that spoke to their experience, that spoke to the seeing things through a scholarly lens, and that spoke to of course story narrative, about just their experience. Often a lot of the speakers were black, and so it was really giving a opportunity for the community to hear from these voices and to be amplified, right? And then you do have folks that go down to the Justice Center, and again, that's another tactic as well. And so, I look at all of these, and I try to support as much as I can, but I do weigh the risks, of knowing that if I'm probably going to go to the Justice Center, there's a probability that there's going to be engagement, right, with law enforcement. There's going to be some engagement with now the feds, and so which can include being tear gas. And so I have definitely, I try not to stick around honestly for that, because it's a risk for me, you know, and certainly want to also um, feel that I don't want to also jeopardize my position, right? For what I do in my occupation as well, and so I definitely weigh all those things and try to support as much as I can. But just following my gut most of the time and supporting, to where what I can do at that point. And so at the same time, I feel like with my job and the things that I do at the state, I think there's also that opportunity, right, to be able to show solidarity by dismantling institutional racism, by being able to dismantle institutions that continue to oppress, underserved communities. And so I feel like there's all sorts of tactics, right, to be able to do this. It's not always going out to the streets and marching. That is a form, and certainly, respect that as well. But I think I weigh my risks a lot more, especially as an older adult. Obviously, I think this, and what I want to do too is also support our youth that are leading this movement. I think that's the one big thing that's always incredible to see and amazing to see, is that our youth are standing up and are using their voices or finding their voice to be able to really put action to everything that is happening as of right now. And so me, it's sort of a middle-aged adult, I always try to uplift those voices too, terms of our youth, because often if you look at history, right, and most of the the, the, the largest or most impactful uh, movements have been led by youth, and which is great to see. And so I know I'm being long-winded in some of my answers, but I think of so many things as of right now that when you're asking those questions. So I'll leave it at that.
Oh, you're good. I love the long-winded answers, just because this is still pretty fresh in your mind. You were just there 2 days ago, and it's something that's going to stick with you probably for the rest of your life to some extent. And so when I was trying to, I believe it was Thursday, I was talking to you. I was trying to see if you'd be open to the idea of coming in, doing a recording live in person, because you have been over to our house, ours meeting my brother and I's house for tech reasons. And, I had all these plans in line to make sure that everything's clean, got at least some airflow, not a whole lot. But then, we are also in a pandemic with COVID-19. So when you are at those protests, can you kind of tell me the measurements that you take when it does come to those risks, like you mentioned, with engagement with the police, and then also risk of your health being compromised with COVID? And also, I know you wear a mask 24/7, which is awesome. But what else do you fear when you get to these protests and you try to stick away from people within reason?
Yeah, it's very difficult, and I also want to preface by also saying that I think I'm not out there every night. I will say that, so I don't want to also portray myself as someone that's out there every night and sticking around when it gets heated. I've definitely tried to listen to myself. When it's time to go, it's time to go. So I definitely want to say that, because I know there's a lot of other people out there that have stuck around and are there, have been there for the last 50 nights, right, and have been there until and stay there when things get to a point where, yeah, tear gas and those munitions. There was a video that last night, right, that was just dropped. This guy getting hit by a baton, right, and it was just like, oh my gosh, so I feel like I'm out there protesting, but I feel there's a lot of other folks out there that are certainly putting in the work, so I just don't want to also portray myself as always being out there and a stunt radicalist, so
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, I do want to say, I have been out there, right? I am trying to contribute and trying to, have my presence be there, in spirit with everyone else and supporting. So when I'm in those moments, certainly trying to stay 6 feet if possible, right? It's very tough knowing that there are large crowds. I also, obviously, yeah, wear masks. You know, sanitize as much as possible. Don't touch anything really. Of course, elbow bumps, maybe fist bumps. That's about it when it
Hmm.
comes to contacting or saying hello to my peers or friends that are in the area. And so really just trying to stay within like a little bubble
Yeah.
as possible. But at the same time, if like I know I have like hugged some people, right? And I know I have, shaken some hands, but at the same time, I come back to my house and, make sure I take off my clothes, sanitize myself as well when I come back. And so, especially like on Friday night, when they did get, there was, macing and tear gassing, that sort of thing there. And so, yeah. And so, yeah, I just try to think about those things and make sure I sanitize and, just be mindful when I'm out there. It's hard to do, but that's what I've done.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in the start of the interview, you introduced yourself in your native language, and then you said growing up was something that you were taught. Now, what is the significance? Or I guess let me rephrase that. What were some of the learning lessons that was used on you to make sure that you remember to always introduce yourself in that manner?
It's just one of those foundational values, right? As a young adult or as a kid that you're instilled with is that that's what you're supposed to do. That's a part of your protocol when you meet other Navajo people, as well as when you go into other communities, and it's based on kinship, um, and the kinship between each other, to be able to know who your relatives are, right? Who those that you're really close with, and so when you introduce yourself, you often find that, oh, maybe you're my brother, or maybe you're my uncle, or you're my grandpa, or my grandma. And so that's what's so unique about, and makes us very distinct as a peoples, right? As And I think a lot of indigenous cultures have this value of kinship, and really take it seriously, because that's just who we are, right? We're relational people. And so as we introduce ourselves, uh, it allows us to make known that this is the family I'm coming from. This is the family I'm related to. For some of our clans, I know that there's also uh, examples of when you introduce themselves, they are from a certain maybe area. You might be able to say, "Oh, okay, you're that clan. Okay, so are you probably from this area of the reservation, or this side of the, um, either, because most of our reservation is in Arizona, New
Mhm.
Mexico, Colorado, and Utah." Um, and so there are also some clans that you can be able to kind of pick up, and in regards to like, oh, okay, there's a lot of that clan members over here. But I mean, obviously of course you ask, where did you grow up and where you from, that sort of thing too. And but I think it's just something that we just do, in terms of honoring our traditions and who we are as Native people.
Yeah. So you learn this kinship at a young age, as a terms of the intro. What was your childhood like in trying to learn this kinship and also learn about the history of your people, and also just trying to have normal kid fun? What was fun for you growing up, and is there anything that still keeps with you to this day that gives you some joy?
Oh, definitely. Um, Growing up, I think what's really interesting, and as folks may have learned this, may have not learned this, there are policies, federal policies, that have impacted Native peoples in this country, in a lot of different ways. And what I mean by that there was policies of assimilation, right? There were policies of termination, that impacted our peoples. Um, there were policies that impacted our Native children being adopted out. So there were all types of federal policies that did harm to our people, um, knowing that the government always saw us as the Indian problem. And so and not a lot of people know that, right? is that our government and the way its treatment towards the indigenous peoples is horrific, right? We our relationship is been an unhealthy one. There has been improvements, but we have a long way to go. And so, what's really interesting in regards to this whole assimilation policy is that it impacted certainly my family, and because I remember my father telling me that his dad, my paternal grandfather, told him, if you're going to make it in this world, you got to make sure to move to the city, right? And move to a place where your kids can go to school, because that's from what my grandfather knew at that time was he was impacted by that assimilation. There was a lot of pressure, right, to assimilate, so that because that was seen as the way to be successful, or even maybe the way to survive as well. And so my dad said, "Yeah, let's do that." And so where we live in Gallup, New Mexico, is a border town, right, to the reservation of the Navajo reservation. And so, I had both of those experiences of growing up in Gallup, as well as going to my grandma's house and Church Rock, and of course we have cattle as well, and raised with that type of with culture. So I was exposed to both, and it was a blessing to be exposed to both, and to grow up with both aspects, because my grandfather was a Natashli. Natashli is a traditional medicine man. There are healers, and this goes for a lot of indigenous peoples. There are healers in indigenous tribes, and so my grandfather was blessed and fortunate enough to be able to learn that practice, and to be able to do chanting ceremonies. And so I was able to grow up with that type of experience of being able to be exposed to my culture, to learn those ways, to hear those songs, to know our medicines, and really, at that time when I was growing up, it wasn't necessarily said, these are going to be something you're going to use in life, but I mean, it was just that this is something you just had to do, right? And you learn by observing things, you learn by seeing, you learn by hearing. And as I started to grow up, I learned, of course, the values of it. Knowing that that was providing a foundation of who I am today, of of ways of thinking, but also ways that to protect myself. Our identity is based in spirituality, and a lot of our spiritual practices are also a means to protect myself mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally from what I face out in the world. And so I know our spiritual practices and our ceremonies, those are strong, um, sorts of powers that keep us in balance and in harmony with not only ourselves as well as our um, outer world, with our relationships with the outer world and with other people, with our jobs, that sort of thing. Everything's based on relationship, everything's interconnected. And so kind of learning all that, as a young kid, and not maybe quite understanding the value of it at that point in time, but as I got older, certainly knowing like, wow, I definitely am blessed to know and to learn a lot of these teachings and practices. Now, what was interesting also is that when I was coming up, and in my hometown, we were my hometown is certainly diverse and a very unique place in itself, but also I think me having friends that are non-native, also I couldn't necessarily explain to them about certain practices that I did, or I can't go to your house because I have a ceremony going on in my house, or I have to go to my grandma's, that sort of thing. And so it was really interesting what I could share, what I couldn't share, with some non-native friends as well. And so that was always an interesting thing that I kind of I didn't necessarily hide. I just didn't say anything, right? Because they would probably look at me a little bit oddly, like, oh, okay, yeah. And I of course wasn't ashamed or anything like that. I just didn't tell them. And so there was that balance of being able to share who I was and what I was experiencing at that time. And but honestly, I was able to live, I guess, an average kid's life, and so I think honestly one of the my fondest memories that I enjoyed was actually going with my family and tending to our cattle. Because we'd able to go to my grandma's house. She'd always have food on the table, ready for us to eat and to then go and handle cattle. Usually Saturday mornings, uh, and so which was tough because we're trying to sleep in and that sort of thing, but couldn't do that. And so my brother, my auntie, when my grandfather was able enough, he would also be out there. My dad, and we'd all just gather and brand or have to tend to the cattle in a certain way. And that's what I loved. I think that's what I miss the most about my being home and my childhood is having those moments, because I had family around me, right? We all came together. And now that I live out here in Portland, I don't necessarily, I have family, yes, I have friends, but it's just a different experience. And so in terms of like being able to, like, to your question, that's what I enjoyed the most, honestly, was that sort of piece. But like every other kid too, I played sports and that sort of thing too, and enjoyed those aspects. But I think the what I miss the most is just being able to be with family around tending to our cattle. And I still, when I go home, I still do that, but it's just not the same.
Yeah.
As you
Yeah.
as you become an adult, things are just not what they used to be when you were a kid.
Everything that was super big when you're younger now is like smaller. You're like, wow, I could put my hands across this whole hallway. Did you have a favorite cattle? Did you give any a cattle any special names or have a special connection with any of them?
No, my aunt though always told me that, I mean, this is your family as well. You take care of them just like you would take care of your family. You
Mhm.
know, just like the land or animals. You take care. You're almost like a steward, right? And if you take care of the land will take care of you. And also thinking about the cattle in the same way as well, and knowing that's with that interconnection type of perspective. That's how we also treated our animals as family, that we would take care of them as well.
Yeah. Just to spin this one last time to the Black Lives Matter movement. So it sounded like when you were talking about your childhood that the government's view on the Navajo tribe, your people, was not so wasn't in the greatest context. It wasn't in any positive context at all. Now, how much of in the Black Lives Matter movement, it has to do with either the government or like the state government or some sort of higher authority not viewing, the black the it just feels weird saying that. It feels weird saying, the our black brothers and sisters that, they don't view them as equals. So in that context, how do you feel spiritually when it comes to seeing this movement and wanting to somehow find some connections between what the Navajo tribe has experienced and you experienced in your childhood to what's going on right now with the Black Lives Matter movement?
Well, I feel with the indigenous populations across the world and within here in the United States, we all faced various sets of trauma, right? Historical trauma. And so there are a lot of parallels and certainly connections that you can make, right, in terms of the Black plight as well as the Native plight, and so you look back and see, slavery obviously was huge, right? It
Mm-hmm.
devastated a lot of Black communities, and um, some communities, Black communities, talk about slavery as intergenerational trauma, right? Things that have happened then still impact us today. Same thing with Native peoples, right? When um, we endured all the policies that I mentioned, not only assimilation policies, but also outright genocide. Um, the relocation of our peoples. There's so many different parallels between the struggles between those that were seen as different, right? We have those connections with each other, and as I continue to talk more with just Black relatives here in Portland, and even before, our struggles are very similar, and although we don't necessarily compare them because it's pointless to compare, but it's more of an intersection to bond,
Yeah.
an intersection to be able to say, shoot, I know what you're going through, and maybe not entirely right, but being able to empathize that, what your people went through, we also went through a very similar thing, and that's what that's what could unite us, right?
Mhm.
Right now, certainly the narrative is around Black Lives Matter, and as Native peoples, um, we should support that. It's not so much that we can't again compare or say, oh, we um, went through more than you. We can't do that, and we shouldn't do that. And so I think what we are right now, I think the most important thing is to be able to unite, is to be in solidarity with one another. And as maybe you have heard, um, indigenous solidarity and indigenous sovereignty, the fight for sovereignty, is very similar to Black liberation. And some people have said there's no uh, Black liberation without indigenous sovereignty. There's no indigenous sovereignty without Black liberation. There's definitely so many intersections and common bonds between our histories and what we've both endured. And so I think what has happened to us, I think it's more of a uniting point, and it's more of something that we can come together on, and to be able to support each other's causes. And right now, yeah, it's about supporting Black Lives Matter, what's happening so right now.
Yeah, and I can never say that I knew what you went through as a child, or I don't know what the Black Lives Matter. Just any. I've never had that experience, so I can't really say I know how you feel, but I'm learning from this whole you know revolution we got going on that it's okay to say that you don't know how they feel. Just be open to listening to them, and
Sure.
that's one thing I'm taking away from this whole thing. Is just like don't don't try to put yourself in someone's shoes that you absolutely cannot do.
Definitely.
It's like, whew,
Yeah. Yeah. In my experience, it's different from the next Native person too.
sure,
I think that's, and just like how Black people say too, we're not a monolith. And same thing for Native peoples. I know there's a lot of other Native people that I know that have gone through much more, and that have gone through much more hardship and really suffer from a historical intergenerational trauma, but also are not so much. I don't want to see things from that sort of deficient base, but more of the resilience. There's also incredible resilience and healing that has happened, and I think that that's what the focus should be on, right? Not so much. Yes, we endured a lot. Yes, it's good to know the history, but I think the other sort of theme we need to make sure that we start to integrate, or at least just have it be central, is the resilience, is us surviving. We're not victims. It's kind of thinking about things more as survivors and thrivers, right? Resilience is certainly within all of our blood, right? And I will say that because my maternal side, I believe it's great grandma went through the long walk, and is my grandmother on my mom's side. When she was alive, um, she mentioned to me that her grandmother went through the long walk, which was when the Navajo people were captured by General Kit Carson of the United States, the government, and basically put and remained captive at Bosque Redondo for 4 years, 1864 to 1868. And incredible amount of people did not come back from that, right? When we were marched from our homelands to Bosque Redondo, um, which was a couple 100 miles. There was a lot of Navajo people, Dene people that didn't make it back. And so fortunately, relatives on my side, right, made it back. If they did not make it back, I might have not have been here, right?
Yeah.
And so thinking about that, it's we're not so far removed from these types of events, right? And so because I feel sometimes people think, oh, that's history, right? That's just something that you know um, happened in the past, right? But when we start to think about our lineage and who we are, again, I can trace back my lineage to be able to say, my people were survivors and made it out of captivity. And if it weren't for them to survive and to be able to be resilient, I might not be here today. And um, so yeah, I always like to share that because it is a story that is off shared amongst a lot of tribal people too. There's a lot of stories out there that talk about the resilience, about how we have that resilience in our bloodline. There's a lot of stories that talk about that we're still here, right?
Yeah.
We overcame all of these policies to still be here, to still be able to, speak our language, share who we are as people, and also help those that are out there. So yeah, just wanted to share that.
Yeah. So surviving, how much of that story did has resonated with you throughout your whole life that made you want to, leave New Mexico, go to University of Michigan, and then go to University of Colorado at Boulder, and then end up in Portland, where you are again a little probably further away from home, and also in I mean, again, gonna call the kettle black. It's a primarily white town. So, how much of that story, how much of the surviving do you feel you have to do on a day-to-day basis, just because you did travel around so much and you are away from your family?
Yeah. Well, I think my foundations that I received as a when I was young, certainly have kept me alive right up to now, and have kept me also in balance and in harmony. It's not easy, right? I mean, and I think that's really what I was told as a young man too, as coming up, is that it's to maintain a sense of balance and harmony with yourself and with others. I mean, that's one of the goals in order to be healthy, right? And to be able to live in this and walk in this world in beauty, as we say, but also in a way that's healthy, where you're thinking positively, you're doing the things you're supposed to be doing. So, at least having a strong foundation built when I was young helped me through all of those events that you just talked about, right? So when I left and went to school, University of Colorado in Boulder, certainly that was pushed on by my family as well. That you need to continue to get educated, to educate yourself so that you could be able to just fight the good fight. And when I got to Boulder, of course, certainly was a culture shock. That was the first time I started hearing the word diversity. And I was like, what's diversity? And people's like, oh, well, it's usually diversity of different backgrounds and different types of thought and that sort of thing. Like, oh, okay, yeah, well, we had that back home, yeah. My high school there's a lot of native people went to the high school as well. And so but being able to see that sort of discrimination and racism that happened within the college towns, within a lot of college towns, right? You always hear about these stories. And so at the University of Colorado, we were certainly very a small population. I think maybe even, I think 0.7 or 0.8% of the student body. Talk about Native people, and then of course you have the other communities of color out there as well. And so, one of the things that I when I first got to my into my freshman year, I had a senior, and his name was James Chu, and he was an ethnic studies major, and he was like, "Hey, bro, you should be an ethnic studies major. We really need your help and your support right now, because it is under fire right now. people are trying to get rid of ethnic studies here at the University of Colorado. So, we need other people like yourself, to come and really support this, because they're really teaching things that we, are of value, right? And teaching history, there's so many different types of lessons, and really the curriculum with ethnic studies is very diverse as well, and I think is also very relevant to what we're going through as of right now, and talking about the history of peoples, racism, that sort of thing, uh, and sort of colonialism and all those different aspects. And so um, and that's when I sort of pursued ethnic studies, but also psychology. And so pursued those two majors there. And I always thought to myself that I'm glad I did pursue ethnic studies, because it was a home away from home. Was able to really connect with people that were, kind of going through the same struggle as well, that also look like me, that sort of thing. And so it was definitely a refuge, and I'm glad I did it. And of course, college, it wasn't easy, um, and a lot of, again, what I relied on too, and a lot of what I did was certainly tapping into what I've always known, is my culture, is looking and seeing, and I don't tell people these things, right? I don't necessarily declare them. So sometimes some people don't know this about me, but being able to rely on prayer, and to always rely on ceremony. That's why you go home a lot too. Is to be able to have get something done for you, so you can be able to restore the balance and the harmony within yourself. And so I did all those things when I went to Colorado, and was able to graduate, and find a job, and then that job just hit a ceiling in some ways, and then eventually went to grad school, and saw that as a vehicle to also propel my career. At that time too, still reached out to the Native community, still relied on my traditions, and my spirituality to get me through, and eventually moved to Portland. But throughout a lot of the experiences in my life, all the hardship that I faced, um, always came back to my culture, always came back to prayer, and to be able to tap into that, because it is something that's just who we are. But it also is there for me to rely on, right? To be able to have it help me out, and knowing that's the beauty of it, right? Is that I have a culture, I'm a part of a culture, and spirituality that I can rely on, and it's just like other types of faith as well, right? People go to church, on Sundays, and pray to Jesus, that sort of thing. Very similar to what I do as well. And so I think again, I'll continue obviously to tap into my spirituality, and my beliefs and my faith to help me out, because it obviously has not failed me, and I know it will never obviously fail me. But more of it's a light for me to continue to walk through dark paths, right? And allows me to continue to just um, really be confident in who I am, because it's a tough world out there. Definitely a tough world. And so yeah, that's just I will continue to practice,
Yeah.
certainly.
Yeah. There you go, man. Now you mentioned that when you're in University of Colorado, actually, you mentioned when you were a kid, having friends that are non native to yourself, non Navajo, and you also mentioned when you're in University of Colorado that you didn't really, you said declare it, you didn't really talk about it as much. How mentally exhausting is that, just to rely on the culture, rely on you know yeah, you go back home for prayer, and is it other times where you just want to tell someone and just let it all off your chest, or are you building up that stamina to keep it on your chest and then release it all during prayer?
Yeah. I think you probably, just like anyone else, you find the people that you can confide into, right? You find people that, you know, genuinely listen, and hear you. And also you find people that, don't necessarily react, or question you. And of course, I try to, surround myself with people that are going to support me, right? People that I can just be open with. And I think we all have various sets of friends, where you can't necessarily have conversations with this, and share certain things about yourself that because they might react in a certain way. And so, that's just what it is. And so, I think as I started to grow up, I think there was just I try to find people that are supportive so I can be able to have outlets and be able to express myself and be who I am, be able to talk about, our spirituality or, culture or the experiences that we go through. And often at times, those are other Native people. But of course, my aunt in my life has also been, someone I can continue to reach out to and talk to about all the struggles that I'm going through. And she helps, me stay humble and also grounds me and really allows me to be able to just share what's on my mind. But, of course, I have very supportive parents as well. And they're in my life. And so, I think it's not so much that I bottle it up or anything. I just try to find different outlets, whether it be, being able to exercise or being able to find someone to talk about this and, to be able to share kind of those frustrations. I think that's just with anything, right? I feel like there's probably things that you share with maybe your Filipino friends that maybe you don't share with their non-Filipino friends because
Sure.
they just might react to it differently. And it's not to say that you're keeping things from them, right? But it's just connecting on a just different level.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you give me an example of a bad reaction you had when you were trying to tell someone or trying to open up to someone?
Oh man,
You don't have to use names, but
yeah, I can't think of one right away, but just I just very 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 sensitive to that, but
yeah, no, that's fine.
and try to be strategic again
Yeah.
about what I share and just yeah, I'm sure there's one. If I think of one, I'll let you know.
Okay. So, master's at University of Michigan, and you got your BA at University of Colorado Boulder. Two pretty big football teams. I know you and I, we both connect over sports. Recently, the Washington, formerly known as Redskins NFL team, are changing their name. And, I follow you on Twitter. We follow each other. You were very ecstatic about this. You were very stoked about this. What did it mean to you? And what did it mean to all of the people you represent that this finally happened? That after years and years and years of like pleading to Mr. Snyder to change the name, it's finally happening.
Seeing this happen, my reaction, kind of my first thought was that anything is possible. I'm sure a lot of you may have heard that the owner, right, wasn't going to change it.
Yeah, very
Was
stubborn on it.
dead set, like, nope, nope, not at all. And of course, there's a lot of people that have been fighting this fight for a long time, and they certainly deserve the credit for being out there and being very visible and vocal about this. And so it really starts to begin to dismantle some of the racism that we do see, right? Whether it be institutional or very direct, right? Because this representation, what we see, this logo, is inaccurate, is totally um, inaccurate, as well as the other logos that are out there that are still being used. That's not it's not depicting us in a very sorry, that was my bike.
No, I'm awake now, so really got my adrenaline pumping.
Yeah. Um, it's not depicting us in the very correct way, and I feel for us to be able to address the systemic racism in this country, right? It starts with those sort of things, right? And but there's much more to it, and I think at least this is a win, for Indian country and for Native peoples, especially our youth that are seeing these things, right? And it has that impact psychologically. It has that impact when they see these things, and I think for others. Um, when this logo was used, I mean, people thought it's okay to depict Native people like this, right? And also, it's just an accurate representation of who we are as a culture, and so I think it's honestly a step in the right direction. There are certainly other logos out there that probably could be taken down, and I think you're seeing a lot of these conversations happening, especially in Canada as well, and so across the world, and so there's just been a chain reaction um, with the Black Lives Matter movement, which is just amazing to see.
Yeah, yeah, I know. And I watch ESPN or NFL Network, and they talked about how this is finally happening, and then we could see, the previous Super Bowl champions getting their team name changed from Chiefs to whatever else, and then there's also baseball and basketball. So, yeah, this is a giant chain reaction that it's been way overdue. So it's going to be interesting because I grew up knowing those teams as those names. I grew up only associating Washington with the Washington Redskins because I play Madden. I watch football. That's the only way I've associated them. So it's gonna be there's gonna be some there's gonna be a lot of, I guess, bumps in the road to fully get everything back to where it should be, and having things socially equal and just justicely equal.
Definitely, yeah. Uh, we just scratched the surface. I think it runs deeper in terms of being able to rid the system of structural racism, right? There's a lot to it, and I think that's something I want to continue to work on and give my time and energy to. Is really how can we make sure that things are there's equity and equality within our systems, knowing that a lot of these systems also weren't built for the people that are for being served in terms of various sets of communities of color, like tribal people or indigenous peoples.
Mhm. And so, with your work, you were a what was it? So, April 2019, you were promoted to director of the Office of Tribal Affairs for the state of Oregon. Sorry, I had a hard time saying that title. um, you had one job before that, where you were the tribal liaison or slash cultural coordinator for the youth village in Lake Oswego. When I looked into the youth village, it looked, from what I saw, that that business just helps children with their mental and behavior health. Now, when I tried to look at other positions that they had there, I didn't see anything about a tribal liaison. Can you tell me about what kind of work you did with them? And I know you got a BA in psychology, so how much did that fly in there also?
Yeah, sure thing. When I moved to Portland in 2013, that was one of the first jobs that I was able to receive, was through youth villages, and I worked for a program called Cedar Bow, which was a specific program that served tribal youth, Oregon tribal youth, as well as other tribes, but served tribal youth um, by providing psychiatric, healing and care and support, to these tribal youth. And so basically, the youth villages was like the organization. They're originally out of Tennessee, but they started one a location out here. But the Cedar Bow, actually was also pulled together by a variety of tribal leaders here in the Portland area, and to meet the needs of the state, right? Of being able to deliver a level of care to tribal youth, meaning the level of care where what we're talking about is sort of a level 5 facility. It's a lockdown facility, and where youth are, they have 24-hour supervision, where there's that constant support throughout the time there. And so when we talk about residential treatment, we're talking about a very intense level of support and care. But we're also, obviously addressing some very serious challenges, right? That the youth that came there were facing. And so being able to provide psychiatric support with the integration of tribal ceremony and tribal culture really was a great experience for me, and allowed me to really um, offer what I know, as well as coordinate services that really connected with our tribal youth in regards to who they were, right? And so the youth were able to receive services and say like cognitive behavioral therapy, trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy. um, they were able to receive various coping mechanisms, right, within mainstream psychiatric practice. But also, was able to take kids to the sweat lodge ceremonies, and was able to take kids, to community events, to, like powwows. And we also brought in, different tribal community members to either teach something to the kids or just connect with the youth as well. And so it was a very unique experience, for me, in a sense that I never thought I would work in such a capacity. But thinking about that job is highly needed, right? There needs to be more of that type of treatment, as well as providers out there across the nation. Because little did I know, after working there, that we were one of the few types of setups that provided that level of care, that also had culture involved, had a native staff person orchestrating a lot of that, but also had an advisor group that were comprised of um, tribal nations, like the nine tribes here in Oregon. And so there was a really unique type of system set up for our tribal youth. And so really, unfortunately, the services, residential services with youth villages, had to discontinue. And so I, had to look for another position. And so it wasn't just the native program, but all the other residential programs, because there was other residential programs that were also functioning, that were just serving, the broader population, the other youth within the community. So yeah, that was it was an opportunity again for me to really receive direct care experience, when it comes to serving youth in that capacity. And but also being able to connect with the native community here in Portland, as well as across the state. Really got a chance to develop some strong partnerships, and that I still value and still have today, in my current position as of right now at the state.
Yeah. So, what is the native community like here? Because when I, hear that you're from New Mexico, I'm like, you would think that, my initial thought was like, oh, when he wanted to take his line of work down to New Mexico, where there is a larger community there. And then when I looked into, just the federally recognized tribes in Oregon, we have 9, and then Alaska is a whopping 229. So I'm like, whew, all right. So, yeah. And then what made you want to come to Oregon and help the native tribes up here?
Well, how I ended up coming to Oregon was I was in Michigan, and pretty much graduated. And so I had some friends that moved out to Portland a year earlier. And at that time, I think it was 2013. At that time, I didn't have any job leads anywhere. And so I decided to move in with them. And so thank God, and I really appreciate them, and really for hosting me, and for allowing me to sleep on their couch, for sure. I'm very grateful. Will always be grateful to them. And so, because it allowed me to really find careers, and find myself where I am now, right?
Mhm.
And so, you know, I just lost my train of thought.
You were you had friends from Michigan coming to Oregon, and then you're sleeping on the couch.
Okay, yeah, and so it just happened to where, yeah, I moved to Portland because also, there was the reputation precedes itself, right? It was graduate schools hearing about Portland and whatnot, but also friends are out here, so I ended up, yeah, moving in with them, and then connecting at a native networking event here in Portland. That's when I met some other Dene community members, two guys, and so one of them told me about a position at that residential program, and that's where it started. That's where it started, where I was able to get a job by networking. Sometimes you hear about networking as you know being a way to get a job. Everyone has their different probably ideas and thoughts
Yeah.
about networking, but I was able to work in the community and find a job a couple months in when living in Portland. So it worked itself out right then and there, and fortunately that position was open, and so that one of the how I was able to continue to really open up my network is that through that position and through the position. So within the position at Cedar Bow, there was already sort of partners involved, and so with any organization or program, you have to make sure that partners are supported, right, and partnerships, are maintained. So the partnerships that were tied to that group were all the 9 tribes, which there are other. It breaks up into other different partnerships. So basically, one of the first things that I did when I started that position was visited all 9 tribes, and so all the way to Burns, all the way to Klamath Falls, Coos Bay, Umatilla.
You put some miles in.
Yeah, put some miles in. So really, that allowed me to connect with the larger, um, state and the larger Native community, because there certainly is a Native community here in Portland that there's also a diversity of I guess the Native community, because you have people that might be tied to some of the Native organizations here like NAYA, NARA. You might have a portion of the Native community that is really active and just goes on hikes. You also have those that maybe are the professionals, right? And so you have various sets of Native people in this community as well. And so and I've gotten to know just a variety of different aspects of our community and our diversity within our Native community. And so just continuing to get to know people, and I think one of the things that is happening that I'm starting to see too is that there is a lot more, maybe not a lot more, but I mean, there is certainly support that is happening right now. A lot of conversations about how the Native community can support Black Lives Matter too. And that's what's very exciting too to hear now that we are also coming together and really having these conversations, discussions, and so. But it's always interesting because I seem to find new Native people to meet every day. We're still moving here, right? And
Yeah.
so also really awesome to see is that it's continuing to grow, because I think in Portland at least there's supposedly 40,000 plus Native people living in this area.
Yeah. So when I did a little bit of research into how many Native Americans live in Portland, to that, I believe it's an up to date, I have 36,776 Native Americans, currently ranked 17th. I had to count that one out, with Oklahoma having the most of 280,000.
Yeah.
Ooh, man. What has been the biggest surprise when when you said there was a diversity within the tribes, I saw a little bit of surprise look on your face. What was that, the biggest surprise that you've encountered when coming to the tribes of Oregon, or was there another one?
I didn't know what to expect, I guess, moving in Portland, and which was fine. And so I think, yeah, just seeing so much of different Native people and doing different things, and so which was great though. I think it was um, something that I really also helped me keep me here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
First moved to Portland, I didn't necessarily have the best acclimation process, or at least just I had my friends definitely, but I think the purpose, was I was still trying to find my purpose, right? Of where I am and where I was at that time, and so and I think with the previous work that I did, with the Native communities, and so I wanted to continue to have that connection, and so it just took some time, and so I was able to find that. But I don't think there was anything that was surprising. I think it just was just saw much more diversity within this Portland community, which is awesome, and so I think just continuing to learn the more of the history, right?
Mhm.
And often one of the pieces that we all tend to forget is that the urban relocation program in the 1950s relocated Native peoples to cities like Portland, like Chicago, like Phoenix, like San Francisco. And so you see these cities like Seattle. You see these cities with large Native populations, and often so a good amount of them were impacted or were brought to here by the relocation program. So it's very unique to kind of learn about that, and I think that's the unique history. And so just learning and talking to more, people that have been here for 20, 30 years, 40 years as well. I think that's what's very interesting, and being able to hear their stories and hearing the kind of the politics, and also just hearing how Portland has changed, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure a lot of people can talk about the different ways it's changed in regards to uh, the way the communities look now and the neighborhoods look now, and yeah, and so that I think that's I guess what I just find interesting. It's not surprising at all or anything like that, but really there's a lot of history that I'm also still learning myself about the Native people that live here in Portland.
Yeah. So, as the director of the Office of Tribal Affairs, now that I said that slowly and not rush through it, can you tell the audience what exactly that job entails? Not like exactly, but as specific as you'd like to get.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I the way I like to put it is making sure that the tribal communities of Portland, which includes the 9 tribes of Oregon, are receiving services efficiently and effectively. And when it comes to the Department of Human Services, and so we're talking about services within child welfare, vocational rehabilitation, aging and people with disabilities, Office of Developmental Disabilities, um, self sufficiency, those areas there. And so I essentially work with all of those programs, and so my job is sort of that middleman in some ways of making sure that again those tribes are getting their needs met when it comes to VR, APD, child welfare, and those areas there. And so that's my job, that's my role. I'm not necessarily providing those services myself, but helping coordinate, helping each of the programs connect and have a positive relationship, right? A solid relationship to where there is continuous discussion about how services are going, how our services are being delivered, but also what can be strengthened, or how can we continue to improve service delivery to our tribal partners out across Oregon.
Yeah, yeah. And then, a handful of months later, I remember seeing your Instagram. You posted a video of someone else recording a video of you speaking to the was it the House of Senate and Judicial Committees. Now, can you? This was pertaining to the ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act. Can you tell me about that experience and having to formalize your thoughts and just that process that led up to that testimony?
Sure. Well, this was testimony to support the Oregon Indian Child Welfare Act legislation back in, I think it was February, during the short session. And so this was basically speaking and providing my testimony in support of that act, and highlighting just the value, the benefits of the state of Oregon taking action to um, really vote that act in, right? Being able to pass that piece of legislation. And so um, when I was thinking about what I was going to say, and what I wanted to really express was just something simple, straight to the point, right? And also something that came from the heart. And so, I wrote something. I think it was probably maybe a 3-minute speech or so, um, but really just trying to hit on all the major points that really matter, right, in regards to how this act would be able to not only protect and preserve tribal children and families, but also being able to respect tribal sovereignty would be that opportunity as well. And just in this, all this that was happening, I guess that piece of legislation is certainly in response to the national attacks on the Indian Child Welfare Act, and I think that are going to continue. There are folks out there that don't agree with what the values or what ICWA does in regards to this federal law, that protects tribal children and families, and preserves culture. And so at that time, when I was speaking in front of that committee, it was really just pointing out that this is an opportunity for our state to respond to the national attacks and to further embed the ICWA law into state law, to codify it, and so that if the federal law were to go away, that's worst case scenario, right? If that law were to go away, the state still has protections for tribal children and families. And so that was really the perspective that I tried to provide, is really highlighting that this is a response, right? This is an opportunity for our state leaders to respond to what is happening as right now, to ensure this law continues to be upheld and recognized. And unfortunately, it wasn't passed at that time. It wasn't passed that because, of course, you probably have heard, as well as others, that I believe the Republican Party, right? They just didn't come back. And so all of the bills within the short session were dead, and so they weren't able to continue that session. So they had an unfulfilled session, right? But they recently had an emergency legislative session where the Oregon Indian Child Welfare Act was passed.
Hey.
So yeah, it took a lot of work. I mean, with the help of Representative Tana Sanchez, she championed that bill, and there was a lot of folks that were involved in this process. It was our office, as well as many other offices, as well as Oregon Tribal Partners, that put in the work, that all did their share to be able to have this passed. Now it's honestly our job, within DHS Child Welfare, to now implement the Oregon Indian Child Welfare Act. So we're be busy when it goes into effect January 2021. But it's also good busy. This act is honestly something that should be national news, really, because of it's further protection. Again, as a state, it's taking a stance, right, and being able to protect tribal children and families. And so we're one of the few states that actually has an ICWA state law, and so I think that's something that should be celebrated.
What are some other states that have this?
Washington, Minnesota, I believe New Mexico, as well as a couple states within the central part of America. I think like Nebraska as well. Don't quote me on that, but at least those that I mentioned Those are the some of the states that are leaving. I believe I'm not too sure about California yet,
Yeah.
but we really looked at states like Washington and Minnesota as because they have a variety of tribal nations within their states, and so they're often really the trailblazers of what of comes to passing legislation that really protect and preserve tribal
Yeah.
nation sovereignty. Really the sovereignty is one of the most important things. And so I think again with the Organic Child Welfare Act, it speaks to all of that, and just excited for what's ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. So it seems like children are something you really focus on. You know, and make sure that they're set up for the future, which is amazing and awesome. So my last question to you: in the time that I've known you, you've always been a Nike head. You've always loved the swoosh. You've always, anytime I went to the employee store, however I got in there, I always check with you, see if you want anything, or if you know if somehow you're like, hey man, can you sneak me in, give me some new kicks.
Yeah.
How did you feel when the N7 collection came out, and having a company of that magnitude, Nike, do this kind of work to help? I know I have a pair of shoes and I gave you some crap about it because it's fun to give you some crap. Yeah, because I got a pair of Air Force One N7s, and I believe when I did research, yeah, the design was from a Navajo tribe. So what does it mean to you to have a big company of Nike's magnitude, have this kind of collaboration and give recognition to the indigenous people?
It's awesome to see. I feel like it's just an example of what other um, companies or organizations can do, as well as being able to partner with folks that are designers with nations, and really I think it's just a great partnership to see, and to continue to develop. I know that Nike also puts out I believe community grants as well, that various tribal communities or nations can apply for, and so they're also giving back in that way. It's not just the designing. I think that's one aspect of, and also being able to highlight, I think, different artists as well. That's awesome to be able to spotlight some different artists. Recently, we saw the theme of, I believe, healing, and really what that means, right? When it comes to sport, or when it comes to tribes, and because I know a friend, Shailene Joseph, she works with the Native Wellness Institute. They did a spotlight on not only her but other youth that were part of the Indigenous 20 something and the Native Wellness Institute. So they told a lot of stories, and I believe they also captured um, stories from other athletes, from other Native athletes. I believe it was like a boxer. And so it's just great to see these stories being shared, I think, and also just these perspectives, right? And I think it's just an opportunity for us to continue to express ourselves, right? To be who we are, and to be able to have that being portrayed through these types of outlets is great to see. Whether people learn from it or just know that we are here as well, right? Native people are we are doctors, we are lawyers, we are healers, we are activists. I think for Nike to be able to put that out, I mean, that they have a huge platform, right? And I think they're also about social justice too. I do feel like they're really taking a stronger stance on that, because of course signing Kaepernick, that sort of thing,
Yeah.
of course, a whole nother conversation. But being able to support him and his message right there, and so I think it's just a great opportunity for Native people to express themselves and be a part of this whole collection. And so I would just love to see that being expanded. Bring in more voices, bring in more artists. Um, you know, give out as much money as you can.
Yeah.
I think that's also a great thing too, and I think you probably saw that Nike, sent money right to the Black Matters campaign and all that, and so yeah, I mean, invest in Indian country, right? Invest in Native organizations, invest in Native artists, those sort of things too, and that's the way that that's what should be happening, and they're doing that. We just love to continue to see that, to see more of that, as well as other underserved communities as well, right? Being able to share the wealth. I know they got a lot of wealth, right? But just yeah, it's just good to see. It's just really good to see. And so, for me to be able to buy N7 shoes, those sort of things, I'm just supporting, right? Because I know that a Native person was a part of designing that collection, right? And so that's just great to hear. That's cool to see, and just inspiring, right?
Yeah, yeah. Every time I wear them, I always think about you. And again, the time I gave you some crap for it. All right, Adam. So thank you so much for sitting down, virtually sitting with me. Are there any special goodbyes that that you have learned in your childhood that you would like to share with us today?
Just want to say, yeah, which is thank you in my language. It's, of course, there's no goodbyes, but just a see you later, right?
Yeah.
Or sort of like, yeah, never a goodbye, but just until next time. I just appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk to some of these topics, and really just excited to see other folks on your Keoni chats, and just I'm grateful again for the opportunity to be on here with you and just to chat with you as well.
That's right, man. Yeah, we've seen each other in person once or twice. So when you feel comfortable, let's go grab a beer and hang out again.
Well, it's good to see you.
Yeah, man.
Thank you for sticking around to the end of the interview. Do you have any follow-up questions for the guest? Throw them in the comments below, then I'll work to get them answered for you. If you like what you heard and you want to listen to more episodes, go ahead and follow Keoni Chats on Spotify and iTunes. If you want a video version, go ahead and subscribe on YouTube. And if you want to stay connected when I'm not posting things, as far as blog posts or podcast, go ahead and follow us on Instagram, the KC Media 13 handle. And then you can also like and follow the Facebook page of Conluke Media, which is also KC Media. And if you want to become a guest, go ahead and message me those on those platforms. Or you can email me at kcmedia13@yahoo.com. And I'll get you scheduled. Let's connect. Let's have a chat. So until the next episode, everyone please take care.